Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Kensington in West London to London Bridge just south of the river. This ride takes about half an hour and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes with long stretches through parkland. By public transport the journey takes about 35 to 40 minutes and requires a change of train or bus or a long trek around the Circle Line, so it is more convenient to take your bike. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to hit the bell icon and subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the channel's supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, there's a link in the description. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting on Kensington High Street and we're going to head right up Kensington Palace Gardens through this checkpoint. Although this is a private road, whenever I've cycled at that barrier it's lifted to let me through, so you shouldn't have any problem going up here. This street is home to a lot of old embassies and ambassadors' residences, and if you have a minute I always recommend a walk up and down it just to point out all the different flags and to try and identify which one is which. But we're not going up it today, we're turning right into Kensington Apartments, which is a little car park opposite Kensington Palace. That's on the left there. That's a royal residence, which is the official residence of the Prince of Wales. Be careful as you cycle around this chicane and consider dismounting if it's busy. We're now in Kensington Gardens, which is the western section of what most people know as Hyde Park. The paths here are well surfaced and they're pretty wide, although it can get quite busy, especially in the summer with tourists. So, as always when you're mixing with pedestrians, make sure you go slowly, give everybody a wide berth, and just be courteous in general. Here we're crossing a path known as the Broad Walk, and if you were to go up left there, you would end up in Bayswater. But we're not doing that, we're going straight down here, down Mount Walk, and this is going to take us east towards Westminster. I particularly dislike riding on this path, and as you can see, there are these little cobbled speed bumps here, which are really uncomfortable to ride over and actually quite dangerous on a wet morning. To add insult to injury, as you get to each set of speed bumps, you'll see these fences on either side. Those have been put in by the Royal Parks Authority because people were riding around the speed bumps to avoid the danger, but because they're a danger in themselves, they've also had to put fluorescent lights on them so that people don't ride into them at night. The whole thing is really stupid. This video was actually filmed in the spring, and when I went back to Kensington Gardens I didn't notice any of the fences, so it's possible that they've been removed. You may be wondering why we're cycling down this path if I don't like it, and it's because there just isn't a safe alternative. It would be much better if there were segregated cycle lanes on Kensington Road, but there aren't. You can see an example of the fences just here that we're passing through. Fortunately, we're leaving Mount Walk in a second and we're on the West Carriage Drive, which has a segregated cycle lane across it. You cross the road and you join it here. This is a two-way track and it's really well protected from traffic. You can see that lots of people are using it. We're going to turn off pretty much immediately here and go down this cycle path. Do go very slowly here as you go around the corner, as that hedge obscures the view of people leaving the cafe, and more than once I've had people jump out in front of me, so keep an eye out. After that, we rejoin the South Carriage Drive, which runs along the southern side of Hyde Park. This is also another big wide segregated cycle lane which goes in both directions, and it's very well used from people getting from West London into Westminster. You might also notice though that the road is closed outside of the segregated cycle lane and there isn't really any traffic on it at all. This is actually a pretty new thing, and it's interesting because actually the closure means that the street is now quiet enough that there's really no need for a separated cycle lane at all. They could have used the resources elsewhere. But it's nice to see it anyway, and it means that you can cycle on the road or on the cycle lane, and both are perfectly pleasant. On the right here you can see this interesting building. This is Hyde Park Barracks. It's home to the regiment, the Household Cavalry, which acts as the King's official bodyguard, although it is also a fighting regiment. Its special role with the King also explains why its barracks is in central London in such close proximity to Buckingham Palace, which we'll be passing in a few minutes. You may notice on your left there's a patch of dusty ground. That's actually a horse ride, so it's officially a bridleway, so if you have a mountain bike you're actually allowed to cycle on that if you really wanted to, but personally I prefer to cycle on the segregated cycle track. This is, as you can see, a great way to get into Westminster as it's completely traffic free. And it's actually, if anything, a little bit on the boring side. There's not very much to see, although it is nice going through the parkland, and you've got these lovely trees on either side. Unfortunately, there are some closing times that apply to parts of this route, so while this section is open 24-hour, the first section through Kensington Gardens in Mount Walk actually shuts at dusk, which in the summer is fine, but in the winter actually often means it shuts as early as 5 o'clock or perhaps even slightly before that. That's a real pain for commuting, as I can personally attest, although it's fine in the morning because it opens at 6 AM. But that's another good reason why we really need segregated cycle lanes on Kensington Road. And continuing down Kensington High Street. Here at Hyde Park Corner, you can use these toucan crossings, which are like pedestrian crossings, except they also have a cycle symbol on them, so you're allowed to cycle through it. And we cycle under this lovely arch here, which a lot of people mistake for Marble Arch, but is not. It's actually the Wellington Arch, and interestingly, it's open as a museum and you can go in. Strangely, until 1992, it also housed London's smallest police station. We're at Constitution Hill here, and you can see from that sign that we want to be on the right hand side of this barrier. It's pedestrians on the left, cycles on the right. As you can see though, not everyone gets the message, and it's important to pick the correct side of the barrier at the top of the hill, because you can see that little fence on the left there. There isn't actually a break in it, and it's pretty much impossible to cross between the two once you make the wrong decision, unless you're athletically gifted in limbo or high jump. You may notice that the street on the right doesn't have any traffic on it, and that's because Constitution Hill is actually, I believe, closed on most Sundays, which is kind of interesting, and if you prefer to cycle on the road, you can do that. Slow right down here, as the crowds outside Buckingham Palace tend to walk in the cycle lane. You may want to make judicious and polite use of your bell to let people know that you are coming up behind them. On Sundays, the Mall, which is the street in front of us past those statues, also is closed to motor traffic, which is why this entire junction outside Buckingham Palace really doesn't have any traffic. And interestingly, it is, as you can see from the multiple lanes outside the cycle lanes, kind of configured for high volumes of motor traffic. And it does make you wonder, why can't it just be like this every day of the week? I do think you tend to find more tourists wandering into the cycle lane on the days on which the road's closed, and that's because, to be fair, the street is closed to cars and you can walk around it, so it's a little bit ambiguous as to whether you should be walking in the cycle lane or not. On the one hand, the road is closed to cars, so people are walking over the rest of the street, so you'd expect them to be able to walk in the cycle lane as well. But on the other hand, it's also actually not closed to bicycles, so there will be people cycling in the cycle lane, and they may not expect you to walk in the middle of it. So yeah, it's a little bit ambiguous, and personally I wouldn't go walking in it myself. We are now on Birdcage Walk, which has a really great cycle lane, which is really well used. There were plenty of people on it today, obviously, we just passed a lot, and it's particularly well used by commuters. In a second, we're going to come up to a junction with a road called Horse Guards, and this junction is controlled by signals. And I actually think that's quite an odd choice, because not very much traffic comes out of Horse Guards, so it's a little bit odd to make both sides of the junction wait. I've always thought that Horse Guards should be completely filtered, with no through traffic on it. It's actually the back entrance to Downing Street, so I suspect the security services would have something to say about putting bollards on it and actually restricting motor traffic access, but I don't see a reason why you couldn't have a no motor vehicles sign, a sort of virtual filter, which most of the time would prevent people driving down it, but which could be ignored by any fleeing prime ministers who needed to leave Downing Street in a hurry. But if you filtered it, that would remove the remaining traffic from the street and definitely remove the need to control access to it with signals, which I've always found kind of cumbersome to wait at, because there's never really anything driving out of Horse Guards Road. We are, of course, we've just passed through Parliament Square here on great segregated lanes, and we've now made it to Victoria Embankment. You can see the Millennium Wheel on the right there, and if you look carefully on our left coming up, you can see there is actually a small protest camp just next to the coach park. I believe that that's actually something to do with COVID and has long since disbanded. As I say, this video was actually shot earlier in the year. Just coming up here, there's a bit of building work. This is to do with the Thames Tideway Tunnel, I think, a massive new super sewer. And it's really important to note that this is a bit of a blind corner, and particularly when you're coming in the other direction. Although it's great that they've put this diversion in, It's a little bit dangerous, and because there's no pavement, pedestrians do tend to wander into the cycle track, so make sure that you are careful as you go around that corner. I have actually seen someone come off their bike there at rush hour, which didn't look very pleasant at all. A quick reminder that if you are enjoying the video, you should hit subscribe. I think some people don't know what subscribing does. All it does is promote the videos on your homepage and just alert you when new ones are posted. So yeah, it's really a win-win thing for you, even if it's not something you do on other channels. Why do I want people to subscribe? It just means more people see the videos, and YouTube's algorithm also treats channels with more subscribers, I think, more generously and shows them to more people. If you really like the channel, then you can also consider supporting it on Patreon. There's a link in the description there. Huge thanks to everybody who does that. I've been able to purchase a new microphone with that relatively recently, which has really improved the sound quality of the videos, which you can tell if you go back and look at the older ones. It doesn't sound anywhere near as good. One thing I forgot to point out as we went past it earlier, because I was too busy telling you to subscribe, is there's actually a cycle counter on this cycle lane here. It's called Cycleway 3 that we're on currently, and it basically keeps track of how many people cycle past it. And it's great. Since 2018, when it opened, over 9 million people have cycled down it, which is incredible. It basically means that the equivalent of every single person who lives in London has gone down it once, although of course those journeys were mostly by a smaller group of people going down it multiple times. If you're on Twitter, you can follow the Twitter account CS3Count, which is a crowdsourced reading of that counter. So whenever people go past that counter, they tweet at CS3Count and they say what's on it, and essentially that shares the data onto Twitter so you can see at any given time where the counter is at. That 9 million figure is from their work, because the counter mostly shows how many people have cycled past it today and how many people have cycled past it this year so far as well. If you need to see a map of this route, by the way, you can find a link to it in the description below. I always provide maps of all the routes I do, and you can download it. It's uploaded to a website called Komoot, so you can either use the Komoot app or you can just go onto the web page that I've linked to and you can download the file. It's in a file format called GPX, which is basically a GPS file, and that should be compatible with whatever app or device you choose to use. If you've got any comments on the video, by the way, I'd love to hear them, so do write underneath and let me know what you think. I'm also always open to requests and suggestions for new routes to do, and also for any infrastructure or parts of town I might have missed. I try to do routes from a broad cross-section of London, so you might notice that I try and alternate between north, south, east and west, but inevitably there are areas which just don't have good routes, and of course sometimes those areas are the ones where video is most needed to show people which way to go. But because the routes that I do on the channel are quiet streets and protected cycle lanes, sometimes it's not possible to reach the level of quality that I would like to do in a video. So I have to balance those things, but I'm always interested in hearing people's suggestions and requests no matter where they are. There are a few things of note along this street, so we are now going underneath Cannon Street Station, and there's actually a full railway there. That's a southeastern railway station, and you can get trains to sort of places like Sidcup and Orpington from there. Now I just want you to keep an eye out on your left here. There's a closed road with a yellow barrier in front of it. It's just there. It's got construction works on it. That's called Arthur Street, and I want you to remember that. So we're going underneath London Bridge here, and the way that we're going to get up to London Bridge is after these lights we turn left up Fish Street Hill, and Fish Street Hill has got a bus and cycles gate on it. You can see that blue sign, 7 AM to 7 PM, buses and bikes only. So that basically means at peak time that's nice and quiet, and this gives us really good access from Cycleway 3, the protected lane that we were on, up onto London Bridge. The problem is, how do you do it in the other direction? Because you might notice that on our right there's a central reservation. So that Arthur Street that I pointed out just before we came up here, when the construction work on Arthur Street is finished, hopefully by the end of the year, you can use Arthur Street in the same way that you use Fish Street Hill, but for going in the opposite direction. So you'd be going in the cycle lane on the other side of the bridge, going northbound, and then you turn off left down Arthur Street, and that would link you up to Cycleway 3. For now though, it's trickier. Really, you just have to get off your bike on the central reservation and look for a spot to cross, which is far from ideal, but it's probably the best way to do it at the moment. or you could go a bit further along to the junction and use a pedestrian crossing. So we've gone over London Bridge, and that's London Bridge Station on our right. We're now on Tooley Street or Duke Hill Street. I really wish that this street had a protected cycle lane on it connecting to Cycleway 4, because there's a really great cycle lane really close to here, but it just doesn't come quite up to the junction with London Bridge, which has some really nice protected lanes on it and connects to Cycleway 3. So it would be really lovely to see that last sort of 200 metres done, connecting Cycleway 4 up to London Bridge. But for now, we've obviously finished. We're there. We did Kensington to London Bridge. It's quicker than getting the tube, certainly. Quicker than getting the tube in a bus. It's probably the best way to do it. Don't forget to hit like and to subscribe and check out the Patreon. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again next time.